I am very concerned that we're now in an environment in that's based on the writing and the multiple statements from various people acting as world leaders. Often they're associated with the World Economic Forum, that are explicitly saying that they wish to exploit this for purposes which have nothing to do with public health.
People who are in the grip of mass formation typically become radically intolerant for dissonant voices. They destroy the people who do not go along with the masses, as if it is an ethical duty to do so. That has been observed in all major mass formations.
I think we should not be Pollyannas. Just because we must be nonviolent, we also must be prepared for our opponents to react with economic violence, physical violence, on all kinds of various forms of violence, including mandates and constraining freedoms, etc. Really all violent attacks on the human soul. I was at MIT at a conference that was sparsely attended except by the invitees. It was on the MIT campus, organized by Steve Kirsch, among others. And it had a group of academics, and most of us were, let's say, outside of the mass formation process. I don't want to say woke or anything like that. And a few were still very much in the academic, classical academic mindset, defending what has happened. And what's academics also use some curious language. They talked about the Truth and Reconciliation process that occurred in South Africa at the end of apartheid. And they were basically pleading that they were willing to acknowledge that they had made mistakes, but that they should not be in any way punished for them. They should, there should be some Truth and Reconciliation board that would acknowledge the mistakes made, and then we would be allowed to go ahead with life as it always was before, and there shouldn't be any consequences, retaliation, etc. So I use these as examples to say, in addition to the one that Matthias appropriately cited about Ukraine, and we're seeing that again in other contexts, this switching of anxiety exactly as he's predicted. I think there's also there's a number of other drivers here. In the last last podcast that Matthias and I were on together, he spoke about the totalitarianism almost always having different nuances and embodiment each time it rises. And in this case, we do seem to have some unique differences compared to prior. So the Nazi Germany or the Joseph Stalin examples aren't really perfect metaphors or analogies. The last thing I wanted, in here we're seeing the effects of big business. I think the proper political science term is inverted totalitarianism, because we have the fusion of the interests of business with the established bureaucracy, which is different from the usual authoritarian pyramid, in which you have a small cadre of leaders that are driving it. We have something different here, and Matthias, I think, has been pondering that. The last thing I want to mention is the analogy of Plato's cave. Plato's cave is an ancient parable, basically, of humans living in a cave. It's one of the classic philosophical metaphors, kind of, and it describes a process where the crowd that remains within the boundaries of a limited worldview, because their ability to perceive a greater reality is restricted. That if one of their members leaves and becomes aware of a greater reality or truth, and then returns to try to save the prisoners in the cave, in this metaphor, they will reject and attack that person. So in a way, this whole thesis that there's no academic or philosophical basis for Matthias's modern version of Hannah Arendt's and Gustav Le Bon's brilliant synthesis is just so overtly false, because the truth is it really traces back philosophically to one of the foundational analogies of philosophy, modern Western philosophy, which is Plato's cave.
Oh. Yes, that's a perfect metaphor, actually, Robert. I didn't think about it. This is a perfect metaphor. That's exactly what happens. That's why the masses are so intolerant towards dissonant voices, because the dissonant voices, as you said, actually, they threaten to wake up the masses. And if the masses wake up, they will be confronted with all this free-floating anxiety, with all this loneliness, and also with all the damage done, of course. All the
Precisely the reason why I shared the story of the academics who want a Truth and Reconciliation committee and not be held accountable is because they're very aware that whether it's consciously or subconsciously of the sins that they have committed, and they don't want to have to confront those and own them.
So people participate, people buy into the narrative, not because they think it's right or correct from a scientific point of view. They buy into the narrative because it leads to these psychological advantages and to this new social bond. That's the reason why they buy into the narrative. And the corona measures actually, in many cases, not in all cases, but in many cases, function as a ritual. And what is a ritual? A ritualistic behavior is a kind of behavior that has no pragmatic meaning and that demands a sacrifice of the individual, a sacrifice through which the individual shows that the collective is more important than the individual. Well, there are two problems now with conspiracy thinking, I think. Some people reject every interpretation in terms of conspiracies, while we all know that history is full of conspiracies. There have always been conspiracies, there has always have been manipulation behind the screens. No matter whom ignores this, actually ignores a large part of history. It's perfectly clear that there always have been some manipulation from behind the screens, that there always is an influence of powerful institutions and an elite who try to reshape society according to their own ideals. That is even the reason why institutions exist, because they have to try to steer society a little bit in certain directions, and they can do so in an ethical way or in an unethical way. But in any case, there always happen certain things behind the screens. That's clear. And some people now seem to be completely incapable of accepting that this happens now as well. So that's clear. On the other hand, people always have a tendency, I think, or certain people have a tendency to overestimate the intentional planning of things. That's also something typical for the human mind, because if we reduce everything to the intentional manipulation of a very small group, a small elite, we have actually a very simple framework, a very simple explanation for a complex process, and that's very attractive to the human mind. We constantly try to reduce things to simple causes, and usually it's not as simple as that. If you just look at the way in which totalitarianism emerges throughout the last centuries, then we see that there are two things that perfectly develop alongside each other. On the one hand, we have a population who is prepared for mass formation as a consequence of all kinds of industrialization, mechanization, the use of technology, and so on. They all disconnect us from our environment, and they prepare a population to be sensitive to mass formation. But on the other hand, we also parallel with this evolution at the level of the population. We also have an evolution at the level of the elite, where throughout the last centuries, the elite became much more and more concentrated, and had almost always more efficient technological means at its disposal to manipulate the population. That's clear. Read books such as Propaganda of Edward Bernays, or Propaganda, with the same title, of Jacques Ellul, or there are so many examples who all also even Noam Chomsky, which is kind of a left-wing thinker, wrote this book, Manufacturing Consent, in which he also explains very well how the elite has certain means, uses all kinds of instruments, machinery to manipulate and to manufacture consent in the population. So we cannot ignore this. This happens. Of course it happens all the time, and it plays a major role, but we cannot reduce everything to that factor. There are many other important factors which all are part of the same complex dynamical system. And only if we really are able to open our mind and conceive the full complexity of the system, we will be able to take the right decisions and to understand what we have to do, but the only thing we can do, and which will be efficient, to make sure that we do not end up in a fully fledged technocratic totalitarian system now. So that's one thing I think we in one way or another, we have to avoid two pitfalls. One, to ignore that there is manipulation behind the screens, and the other, to reduce everything indeed to an invisible enemy and believe that it would be sufficient to destroy the elite in order to solve the problem. This won't work. This won't work simply because history has shown us time and time again that totalitarianism, the point of gravity of a totalitarian system, is not situated in the elite. It's situated in the masses. And that's exactly why someone such as Stalin realized that he could perfectly eliminate 60% of his own Communist Party members, that the system would not destabilize, that it would just continue, that the eliminated members of the party just would be replaced by other people. That shows us very well, for instance, what the difference with a classical dictatorship is. If in a classical dictatorship, a part of the elite is eliminated, a substantial part of the elite is eliminated, then the system, the totalitarian state, will collapse. It will topple over. That's typical for that, because the point of gravity of a classical dictatorship is situated in the elite. So the elite plays a crucial role in a totalitarian system. But as soon as you destroy a part of the elite, it will just be replaced. And that's, as soon as you realize that, you understand that the only thing that can destroy a totalitarian system is the totalitarian system itself. And that's the advantage, the cynical advantage of a totalitarian system. It always destroys itself. It is inherently self-destructive. And then, when you understand that the only thing you have to do, it's of course very difficult, but you have to make sure that the totalitarian system does not destroy you before the totalitarian system destroys itself.